year after the national dialogue process was installed in Venezuela, both opposition and government representatives have noted the upcoming parliamentary election as the result of the agreements reached. Greek authorities have continued to struggle in order to move thousands of refugees and migrants sleeping roofed in temporary camps. South Sudan president has removed the country's finance minister along with other top officials from office over corruption allegations. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Laura Palmeiro. And we begin in Venezuela, where representatives of the opposition to the National Dialogue Initiative, Timoteo Zambrano, stressed it was crucial to ensure a transparent electoral process in the lead-up of parliamentary elections to be held on December 6.
We need to do over these almost 2.5 months or 2 months and 20 days is to continue protecting this process that implies everything that was approved, including very important guarantees that are being met. And it's worth repeating as the electoral timetable advances. These guarantees are not set apart from the electoral schedule. As such, we believe that on December 6th, not only will we have a new National Assembly, but on having that new National Assembly, the National Constituent Assembly will be deactivated, which is also included in the agreements signed on September 16th.
Meanwhile, the head of the national dialogue process for the Venezuelan government, Jorge Rodriguez, highlighted the defense of Venezuela's sovereignty in the framework of the political agreements reached in the lead-up of the December parliamentary elections.
First, we have demonstrated that even though we are adversaries, we have a position regarding the defense of national sovereignty, the right to self-determination of the Venezuelan people, national independence, the defense of the Essequibo territory, defense against, and the denunciation of the illegal coercive measures against the Venezuelan homeland, and besides recognizing that we are adversaries, acknowledging that we can reach agreements so that all of us know the clear rules of the game for the electoral process of December 6th.
A new corruption regime involving sectors of the Venezuelan opposition linked to lawmaker Juan Guaidó was recently revealed, the objective of which would be to steal assets from Venezuelan companies located in the Caribbean countries. More details in the following report.
An investigation by journalist Patricia Poleo, who is openly opposed to the Venezuelan government, revealed a new corruption plot by political and interest groups linked to the lawmaker Juan Guaidó. It is related to assets of the Venezuelan treasury in joint enterprises of subsidiaries in 19 countries of the Caribbean, where the state oil company, PDVSA, has shares of between 25 and 60%.
Maduro could recover those assets that the interim government of Juan Guaidó did not rescue, not because of incapacity, but because the company that was about to be contracted to do so did not agree to pay the bribe that was demanded by the officials appointed by the interim government for the case.
According to the denunciation, a company of financial speculators elaborated a proposal to appropriate $40 million of these assets, but denounced the corruption of officials ordered by Guaidó through the request of payment of bribes and blackmail, even without having carried out the operation. Poleo noted that these actions are prosecuted as federal crimes in the United States.
As the opposition, they have taken there. And being the interim government, they have tried. But let me tell you that what they tried here, they did not succeed because the businessmen refused to accept the blackmail.
This denunciation is added to what happened with Venezuelan chemical company in Colombia, Monomeros, and Citgo in the United States, and the supposed humanitarian aid that they intended to bring over the border with Colombia in 2019, and other denunciations of the appropriation of funds of the Venezuelan state for the personal use of lawmaker Guaidó and his collaborators.
Guaidó and his entire team are working to benefit themselves, and while they do so, Maduro remains in power.
The denunciation comes from the very opposition of Venezuela and continues to undermine this sector, with only 3 months to go before the parliamentary elections.
Mexico's Supreme Court of Justice is set to evaluate the request presented by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador to call a referendum on whether to prosecute the country's last 5 presidents for corruption. The government proposal seeks to hold a referendum on June 6, 2021, the same date as the midterm elections, or on the first Sunday of August 2021, taking into account Article 35 of the Mexican Constitution. If it goes ahead, the referendum will ask Mexican citizens to decide whether they agree or not for the competent authorities to investigate and prosecute former Mexican presidents Carlos Salinas de Gortari, Ernesto Zedillo, Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderón, and Enrique Peña Nieto for alleged corruption. Taken together, these 5 former presidents' terms span a total of 30 years, considered to be one of the most intense periods of corruption, impunity, and social violence in Mexico's history. Ecuador's National Electoral Council has excluded 4 parties from participating in the presidential elections to be held in February next year, including that which nominated former President Rafael Correa to stand for vice president. The decision was approved taking into account the request made by the Comptroller General Pablo Celi on March 10th this year, who pointed to alleged irregularities found in the electoral registrations of the Social Commitment Force Libertad es Pueblo, Social Justice and Podemos parties. Former Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa refuted the allegations, noting that the move was aimed at blocking his Social Commitment Force from participating in the vote, in order to ensure his political disqualification, as well as the distribution of the current National Electoral Council President, Diana Atamaint. Lawmakers, council members, and other leaders of the National Unity Front in the Bolivian city of Cochabamba have withdrawn their support for the de facto president Jeanine Áñez ahead of country's general elections to be held on October 18th.
Today, all of the National Unity Front's leaders have presented our resignations to the Together Alliance in Cochabamba at the national level because we are calling for the unity of the opposition. We resign as a first point from the National Unity Front and the Together Alliance. Secondly, we call for the unity of the opposition. Here we are, city councillors, authorities, leaders and members of the National Unity Front of the Assembly, ready to support whoever can defeat the movement towards socialism.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Greek authorities have continued to struggle in order to move thousands of refugees and migrants sleeping roofs into temporary camp. This a week after the overcrowded Moria migrant camp burned down, while fears grew about the coronavirus outbreak in the island of Lesbos. About 13,000 people, mostly refugees from Afghanistan, African countries and Syria, were left without shelter, proper sanitation or access to food and water by the fire that tore through Moria, Greece's biggest camp. No one was killed in the fire, which broke out after quarantine measures were imposed following the discovery of COVID-19 cases on the site. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has told German Chancellor Angela Merkel during the video call on Wednesday that the docking of Turkey's Oruk Reis's seismic survey vessel for maintenance does not mean its operations in the eastern Mediterranean are done. Oruk Reis returned to waters near Turkey's southern province of Anatolia on Sunday for what Ankara called routine maintenance, a move Greece said was a positive first step in its intentions over offshore natural resources in the eastern Mediterranean. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu told an interview with broadcaster CNN Turk that Oruk Reis maintenance may take a few weeks, according to the Energy Ministry. Once maintenance is finished, we will continue our operations with determination, they said. Sally has weakened into a tropical storm, but the Gulf Coast region still faces issues from the slow-moving storms, drenching rains and flooding. The mayor of a coastal Alabama town says one person has died as a result of Hurricane Sally. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says the storm's maximum sustained winds decreased Wednesday afternoon to near 110 kilometers per hour, with additional weakening expected as Sally moves inland. Rivers were rising late Wednesday from Sally's heavy rains, and at least 8 waterways in South Alabama and the Florida Panhandle were expected to hit major flood stage by Thursday. Local authorities in the Spanish capital Madrid have decided to reinforce health measures in neighborhoods, recording a steady surge in new COVID-19 cases, while noting that 23 outbreaks remain active in the autonomous community.
I think we are going to consider all kinds of measures in what will be decided between now and this weekend. Restrictions on the grouping of people and also on mobility. Although technically, probably we cannot use the word lockdown, but in the context in which we are, what we are proposing so that people understand is lockdown in inverted commas, by health zones that are most affected, that have the greatest impact. Last week, we detected 19,483 cases, and since the beginning of the pandemic, there are more than 130,000 cases confirmed by PCR in the community of Madrid. We have counted 130 outbreaks of contagion, but only 23 are still active. At the moment, this is a relaxing behavior on the part of citizens that we cannot afford. I think it's something we all see every time we go out in the streets, mainly on terraces and leisure places, but also in parks or at popular meetings. It is therefore time to insist more than ever on the message of responsibility and strict compliance with the measures adopted. We cannot go backwards.
Following a meeting with top officials on Wednesday, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko reiterated the intention of the United States and European governments to destabilize the country and impose a regime to their liking.
The so-called spontaneous mobilization of society, the birth of the so-called revolutionary situation, and the idea of the illegitimacy of the election are all myths. They are utterly destroyed by a deep analysis of the events that happened long before the election cycle of this year. The tactics of the organizers follow the classic American guidebook for color revolutions. This name has been brought up a lot lately, and I remind who it is, the famous Gene Sharp. Now we can look back and in detail break down each stage in the attempted destruction of our country, which we thankfully prevented and will continue to prevent. The joint campaign of the opposition built its tactics on the exploitation of the female image, which is traditionally venerated by Belarusians. This time it took on a farcical form. The marches of the trio were accompanied by euphoric slogans and unsophisticated chants like, "We love, we can, we will win," as well as balloons and flashlights. We had already seen these tricks in the revolution in Georgia, Armenia, Serbia, and other countries.
Local authorities in the Chinese city of Wuhan have announced the resumption of international flights under the observance of strict health protocols. Meanwhile, the National Health Commission reported no new locally transmitted COVID-19 cases across China's mainland on Wednesday, representing a record 31 days without new local cases.
This is the first international passenger route to resume at Tianhe International Airport. 1 or 2 more other routes may resume this month. We strictly follow China's relevant COVID-19 prevention policies, carry out whole process health monitoring, and take management and control measures on inbound passengers to prevent the spread of the pandemic. Inbound travelers will also go through a 14-day intensive medical observation. For outbound passengers, after having their health code scanned, registering their health status and having their temperatures checked as stipulated in the National Epidemic Prevention and Control Policies, healthy passengers are allowed to leave the country. We strictly ensure the safety of passengers on both sides, inbound and outbound.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. South Sudan President Salva Kiir has removed the country's finance minister, along with other top officials from office over corruption allegations. Other officials, including the head of a state-owned Nile Petroleum Corporation, the NRA Commissioner General, and Nilepet Boss, were also fired. The reasons for their dismissals were not mentioned. However, local media reports it was allegedly due to a financial mismanagement. The current economic crisis motivated South Sudan's president to create an economic crisis management committee that recommended the firing of these officials. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced the reopening of the country's international borders starting next month, while noting visitors must provide a negative COVID-19 test result upon arrival. South Africa is the hardest hit nation by the coronavirus pandemic in the continent, having reported over 650,000 confirmed cases.
Travel may be restricted to and from certain countries that have high infection rates. A list of those countries will be published, and it will be based on the latest scientific data that we will be able to get. On arrival, travelers will need to present a negative COVID-19 test results not older than 72 hours from the time of departure, from whence they will have come from. We cannot afford a resurgence of infections in our country. A second wave would be devastating to our country and would again disrupt our lives and livelihoods. It is up to each and every one of us as South Africans to ensure that this does not happen.
Demonstrators took to the streets in Nigeria's largest city, Lagos, this Wednesday to protest a hike in fuel and electricity prices. The protest was called by the Labour City Society Coalition's Joint Action Front, which has also rejected the privatization and deregulation policies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in the country. The deputy chairman of the front noted that the Nigerian government continues to inflict suffering on the people as a result of its policy failures. Meanwhile, local police arrested several members of the Socialist Party of Nigeria, as well as journalists, including the party national secretary and youth leader. Fuel prices in Nigeria have risen from 38 cents of a US dollar to 42 cents per liter, while electricity prices have doubled from 8 cents to 16 cents per kilowatt hour.
Asking for better life, because look, Nigeria is, don't forget that we are still said to be the poverty capital of the world, and 110 million Nigerians are living on less than $2 a day. Life is extremely very difficult, and so you are now adding, imposing more hardship on the people of this country. It will not work.
The Prime Minister of Libya's United Nations-supported government has announced his intention to hand over power to a new administration in October amid talks between different Libyan factions to bring peace to the country. Libya has suffered a devastating internal armed conflict since a NATO-led coalition invaded the country in 2011.
The last point on this note is that I announce to all my truly honest desire to hand over my duties to the next administration at the very latest by the end of the coming October, by which time I hope that the negotiating committee will have completed its work and chosen a new presidential council, and also chosen and appointed a new head of the government who can take on the duties, and we pray for their success, God willing. And this is all what was stipulated at the Berlin conference, which was authorized by the UN Security Council.
Iran representative for the United Nations High Commissioner urged the UN's top court to declare competent to judge over the case of U.S. sanctions claiming they are ruining millions of lives. Along with Justice established that the U.S. measures and the underlying policy of maximum pressure disregard the very foundation of international law have caused a record drop in Iran's trade, a near doubling of food prices, and severe effects to the health system amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The International Court of Justice in The Hague is hearing documents this week from Tehran and Washington before deciding whether it has a jurisdiction to deal with this case.
Were decided by the United States President without any legitimate justification to meet a domestic political agenda and to pursue its continuous policy of unilateralism in foreign affairs.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Laura Palmeiro. Thank you for watching.